People have a tendency to confuse the genre of science fiction with sci-fi fantasy. These two are not the same thing. The books, movies, and games that occupy the realm of sci-fi fantasy tend to put greater emphasis on the fantasy while relegating the sci-fi element to aesthetics. Star Wars is a perfect example of this. While aliens, spaceships, and other habitable planets largely make up the franchise's aesthetic and all fall within the realm of scientific possibility, the concept of the Force is pure fantasy, and it is largely what the series is based around. Science fiction, however, attempts to present probable futures based on our present reality, removing the fantasy element altogether. At one point in time, concepts like video calling, robots, even mobile phones might have, ironically, seemed like pure fantasy, but now they are ubiquitous. The greatest of science fiction stories tend to be the ones that lay out a clear pathway between our present and our future. This is why books like 1984 and Brave New World have stood the test of time and continue to be referenced to this day. They took the developments that were occurring at the time of their publishing and presented one probable future. Unfortunately, creating a legendary sci-fi story like 1984 or Brave New World that is cerebral as well as mainstream is nigh impossible. Most great science fiction that is published in the present deals with concepts ahead of their time. As a result, it takes several years for these stories to be accepted by the masses. I hope that with the imminent release of Cyberpunk 2077, the concepts inherent to that game, like digital consciousness and body modification, will be popularized in the gaming medium. This will hopefully allow the cyberpunk stories that preceded it and influenced it to get their proper due. I think the greatest example of an underrated sci-fi cyberpunk game is probably Observer. Like the great science fiction stories of our past, Observer takes the biggest developments of our current day and paints a dystopian future based on their logical implications. The primary focus of the game is the issue of digital augmentation, a process that we are currently seeing the beginnings of with the constant improvements of bionic limbs and other transplants. When we inevitably get to the point that we can transplant a human brain or digitally mimic human consciousness, what effects will there be on us as individuals and, by extension, the societies we live in? What if there are errors with our augmentations? What horrors might we experience if our brains and our consciousness are not properly augmented? Observer responds to these questions in the most pessimistic way possible. Worst of all, the game demonstrates how easily its pessimistic dystopia can come to be. In order to give a comprehensive overview of Observer's worlds and concepts, and how our future might resemble the one presented in the game, I believe it is best to start with a summary of the overall story. Needless to say, there are spoilers ahead. In the early 21st century, augmentation became an obsession. The thought of becoming stronger or smarter with a simple implant became intoxicating. Any possible side effects seemed worth it, but nobody could have predicted the nanophage, a disease which exclusively attacked those who were nano-augmented. As any computer programmer will tell you, a single piece of code that is mistyped or out of place can cause the whole system to malfunction. If one is trying to augment a piece of technology to their brain or body, one mistake has the potential to birth disaster. In this case, that single mistake was known as the AA glitch. The point at which the nanophage becomes easily identifiable is the puncture stage. Tiny dotted wounds start to appear on the patient's body, usually originating at the point where cybernetics meet flesh. After enough time has passed, the nanophage causes every juncture in the body to turn into a gangrenous mess, eventually resulting in a complete biological shutdown of the host organism. The widespread nature of the nanophage led to complete global destabilization, and then to a war known as the Great Decimation. The West killed the East, and the East killed the West. The problem of unequal wealth distribution metastasized. Only those with the most money, power, and influence were able to weather the storm brought on by the disease and the war. The great victor in all of this was the Chiron Corporation. With no business or government left to oppose them, they set up a crooked empire known as the Fifth Polish Republic. The society that was produced under their rule was divided into three classes: the A class, the B class, and the vast majority of people, around 91.6% of the population, fell into the C class, the working class and the poor. To maintain this paradigm of control, Chiron made use of a special team of augmented police that could identify guilty parties within minutes. They did this by invading your mind, by using a cable to hook up to your consciousness and observe your memories. We play as one of these titular observers, a man named Daniel Lazarski. One morning, while on patrol, Daniel receives a call from his estranged son, Adam. Adam used to work for the Chiron Corporation until they tried to steal his research for nefarious purposes. In order to protect himself, Adam fled into the Class C districts. Adam sought help from his father, but before he could tell him his location, his call gets cut off. Daniel traces the call to a local tenement building. Upon arriving there, he goes to the room that supposedly belonged to Adam, only to find a body with a missing head. When he discovers the body, the entire building goes into lockdown. This is a widespread procedure installed by Chiron. Whenever a nanophage outbreak is suspected, the building is locked down. In the meantime, while he waits for the lockdown to be lifted, he begins to search for his son. As Daniel goes through the building, he encounters the various residents, all of whom provide various clues to his son's whereabouts. His interactions with these people evoke several of the game's key concepts. I will start with the topic of digitizing consciousness. With every year that passes, advancements in artificial intelligence increase exponentially. Eventually, some sort of technology will be produced that can mimic our consciousness, just like bionic limbs are beginning to mimic our organic limbs. When that happens, there will be attempts made to augment the brain, either partially or entirely, and that augmentation needs to be perfect. As I said before, there only needs to be one faulty piece of code to bring about disaster, for both the body and the mind. In Observer, the victims of the nanophage not only have their bodies mutilated by poor augmentation, but their minds. The result is something akin to the monsters one sees in a Silent Hill game. What is most terrifying, however, are not the monsters themselves, but the realistic pathway that is marked between our current non-augmented selves and these monsters. Thankfully, the world of Observer provides a cure-all, one that prevents this hypothetical transformation. The synchronization between the human body and its augmentations is maintained with a drug known as synchrosine. As long as there is a regular supply of this drug, we will maintain our grip on reality. Naturally, however, there are times throughout Observer where there is a lack of the drug, and Daniel begins to lose his grip on reality. When this happens, his consciousness produces several hallucinations. The world around him literally turns upside down. The walls bleed, and monsters attack him. Just like in the aforementioned Silent Hill, the line between reality and unreality blurs. The products of his unconscious mind come to life. Even if Daniel tells himself that what he sees isn't real, his brain perceives it as such. If the hallucinations become violent, Daniel can receive such a shock that he could literally scare himself to death. On his journey throughout the tenement building, Daniel must contend not only with those affected by the nanophage, but his own deteriorating reality. On top of all of this, he needs to be able to distinguish between where his reality ends and where someone else's reality begins. Returning to the Observer concept, Daniel has the ability to dive into the minds of others via cable. He can witness the events of someone else's life as if it were reality. Simply put, the collective human desire to read minds is given birth by science. However, as is wont to happen when humans see an opportunity to play God, they are blind to the potential negative side effects. For instance, consciousness consists of two aspects: the conscious side, which is visible and ordered, and the unconscious side, which is invisible and chaotic. If the observer is going to dive into someone else's consciousness, they will not only witness their conscious memories, but also the nightmares which reside in the unconscious, in all their petrifying derangement. Of all the negative side effects that might come along with observing someone else's memories, the worst example deals with what is known in physics as the observer effect, the very law this game is based on. The central dictum of this effect is as follows: nothing that is observed is unaffected by the observer. If you don't know what this means, think of it this way. You are only able to see the world around you if there is a certain amount of light illuminating your surroundings. If you're searching for something in a pitch black room, you will only find it if you shine a light on it. When you shine that light, the object you are looking for is forced to reflect that light in some way. Thus, the observed is affected by the observer. In respect to the character of Daniel, the objects that he observes are not objects at all. They are subjects, human beings, who are also capable of observing, just not in the way that Daniel does it. When Daniel stares into other people's minds, those minds stare right back. When this happens, the minds of both Daniel and the person he is observing begin to merge. The nightmares that reside in both their unconscious minds begin to cross over, making it sometimes impossible to distinguish whose mind we are experiencing. The result is something so twisted that it could only be adequately described as hell. The game makers over at Bloober Team were clearly aware of this fact, given the game's numerous references to religion, as well as hell's most famous depiction, Dante's Divine Comedy. Though Observer paints a mostly pessimistic version of the future, it does illustrate one instance where humanity's technological ambition could be put to good use. Before I do, however, I would like to finish summarizing the story. Following his various encounters with the building's residents, he figures out his son's location. It is in a location called Sanctuary. Sanctuary is located in an abandoned church. Inside, one can find a place to upload their consciousness into a digital realm, in case they need to find, well, Sanctuary. After uploading his consciousness into Sanctuary's system, Daniel finds Adam's consciousness inside this virtual reality, populated only by digital-looking trees. Adam tells Daniel that he uploaded his consciousness into Sanctuary in order to avoid Chiron's reach. However, it seems that Chiron has triangulated his location. The lockdown that was imposed on the building by Chiron wasn't imposed due to a nanophage outbreak. It was done to prevent Adam from escaping Sanctuary. As they speak, Chiron is trying to break through Adam's digital defenses. If Daniel could manually lift the lockdown, Adam has the chance to digitally outrun them. Daniel proceeds to the adjoining building where the lockdown switch is located. Upon flipping the switch, Daniel is knocked unconscious by monstrous force and wakes up in a digital realm. In this realm, Daniel finds what looks like the decapitated head of his son. The voice of Adam then begins to speak to him. I say the voice of Adam because this is not the original Adam. It is an enhanced copy of the original Adam's consciousness. This enhanced form of consciousness is exactly what Adam was working on when he was at Chiron. The consciousness he created is the one that Daniel is now speaking to. Now, for whatever reason, the original Adam became fearful of his creation. He tried to destroy it by sending a virus after it, but the enhanced Adam had a member of the building he was in kill the original Adam by chopping off his head. Moreover, the lockdown that was supposedly enacted by Chiron was actually enacted by the enhanced Adam, so that he could bring Daniel to him. The whole purpose of this journey was to bring Daniel's body to this enhanced Adam. The new Adam still wishes to avoid Chiron, and the only way he feels he can do so is if he merges with an observer's body and mind. A body and mind that is completely, quote, detached from the grid. The consequence of this merging will be something godlike, indescribable by human language. Appropriately, the name of this first creation will also be Adam, who was the name of the first man in the Bible. We have seen the concept of merging consciousness before in science fiction, in movies like Ghost in the Shell and particularly in games like Deus Ex, both of which have undeniably not only influenced Observer, but the aforementioned Cyberpunk 2077. It is an enticing concept. What would it be like to birth something like a god? To merge human flesh with a godlike mind? What effect would that have on our world? What would it be like to have that consciousness? Is it worth the risk? If it were up to you, what choice would you make? Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to hit that like button if you like this video. You guys have been doing that a lot for me lately, and it has been helping me, so please keep it up. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitch, on Twitter, and join my Discord server. Links to all of those things are in the description box below. Finally, I'd like to thank Eliza, as always, for helping create the thumbnail for this video. Make sure to check out her work by visiting the link in the description box below. Until next time, just remember, stay yellow.